few nights ago, I went to 7-Eleven with my boyfriend Martin. He had a craving for onion rings. He parked just outside the building and said he'd wait in the car while I ran inside. I hated it when Martin ordered me around like that. He was the reason we were here, and yet I had to do everything. I didn't argue though. I figured it would just take a minute. When I got inside, I was the only customer there. It was nighttime, and the man behind the counter looked half asleep. I gave him the sack of onion rings, and he very slowly typed into the register. It was almost comical how slow he was moving, as if he enjoyed watching me wait. Finally, he gave me my change, and I hurried out of there. But once I stepped onto the parking lot, I saw that our car was empty. The driver's side door was open, and Martin was gone. I knew he didn't go inside, so I looked around the parking lot, and I couldn't find him anywhere. Instantly panicked, I ran back inside and told the cashier that my boyfriend was missing. He looked upset, but I could tell that something was off. He didn't seem surprised at all that someone had gone missing outside his shop. The cashier was hiding something from me. He knew that someone was going to take Martin. That was probably why he moved so slow whenever I was at the counter. He needed me to stay inside for as long as possible while Martin was taken. At least, that's what I was thinking. I reached across the counter and grabbed him by the shirt. "Where's my boyfriend?" I screamed in his face. He got this panicked look on his face and then reached for something behind the counter. Before I knew it, he pulled out a rifle. I backed away with my hands up, worried that he might shoot me. But instead, he ran around the counter with the rifle in his hands, then raced out the front door. He turned back towards me and said, "Wait here." Then he ran into the parking lot. I tried to see where he went through the window, but it was too dark. I heard 2 gunshots, and then nothing. I stood waiting in the 7-Eleven for a long time, but the cashier never came back. I guess I was too confused by the whole situation to even think about calling the police. I finally came to my senses and grabbed my phone, calling 911 and reporting a kidnapping, even though I didn't know for certain that that was what had happened. The cop lady said the officers would arrive in less than 10 minutes. She told me to stay exactly where I was. I waited in the 7-Eleven, staring at the wide front windows to see if anyone was coming. With my phone still in my hands, I decided to call Martin's cell phone and hoped he'd answer. All I wanted was for him to explain that this was just some big mistake, or maybe it was a practical joke. Martin didn't answer. Even though I was more scared than I'd ever been in my entire life, I had to find out what was going on. Slowly, I walked out of the building and looked around. Our car was still empty. I walked around the corner of the building. I was so focused on the space around me that I didn't see where I was walking. I walked right into something soft on the ground. It was the cashier, lying dead on the pavement. His rifle sat next to his lifeless body, a scalpel sticking out of his neck. God, I felt horrible for the poor man, but at least this told me that I was going in the right direction. I picked up his rifle and continued alongside of the building until I saw a small shed hidden in the back. The door was halfway open, so I slowly leaned inside and saw exactly where Martin had gone. He was lying on an operating table while a man in a dirty lab coat was cutting into him with a scalpel. Martin wasn't struggling, but I could see his chest rising and fall. He was still alive. "Welcome," someone said to me, but it wasn't the doctor. It was a beautiful woman in a short red dress. "What are you doing to my boyfriend?" I asked. The doctor didn't stop working. He continued to slice into Martin's stomach. The woman laughed. "Harvesting," she answered. They were stealing organs. They set up a makeshift operating room in this little shed, and from the looks of it, She must have waited outside the 7-Eleven to seduce men into following her here. I could hear Martin groan on the table. He was too weak to speak, but he must have been able to feel what they were doing to him. The woman stepped closer. "Is this your boyfriend?" she asked. He didn't act like he was dating anyone when I found him. I remembered my time inside the 7-Eleven. I was in there for less than 5 minutes, and in that time, Martin had been seduced, injected, and taken away. He must have not have put up a fight at all. He must have been too horny to care. I was horrified at what they were doing to him, but I also felt deeply betrayed. It was his own fault that this woman had tricked him. He should have just waited in the stupid car. "You look healthy," she said. "I can make a lot of money selling you for parts." I stepped backward, and she grabbed me by the shoulders. She was stronger than I realized. And behind her, the doctor kept cutting into Martin. "It looks like you have 2 choices," the woman said. "You can stay here with your boyfriend, but we'll have to take you apart. Or you could pretend you didn't see anything and leave him to us." I knew I should have fought back. I loved Martin, and the things they were doing to him was just awful. But on the other hand, the police were on their way. And more importantly, Martin had betrayed me. So I said goodbye and walked out. When I got back to the front of the parking lot, the police had already arrived. Several of them were examining the cashier's body. I walked to one of the policemen and told them about the shed. He pulled aside a couple of his fellow cops and raced around the corner. By the time they got to the shed, the woman and the doctor were already gone. Martin was still laying there. Well, most of him anyway.
I walked to 7-Eleven right before they closed. I needed to buy cigarettes. The place was empty except for a teenage girl who was behind the cash register. She smiled at me, but I could tell she was annoyed that she had to serve one last customer while she was already in the process of closing up. I asked for a pack and gave her my money. I thanked her and turned around to leave when an old man walked in. He was extremely short and thin, and he wore an eye patch. The cashier said, "I'm sorry, sir, but we're closed." It had just turned 11. For a second, it looked like the man was about to turn around and leave, but instead, he marched toward the counter and screamed at the cashier. As he pointed at me, he said,
"You just served him. Is he better than me?"
Despite his small size, the man seemed dangerous. I wanted to get out of there before things escalated, but the poor girl behind the counter looked so young and afraid. I didn't want to leave her alone with the man. So, I remained standing by the door, waiting to see if he would calm down and leave. Rather than put up a fight, the cashier took back what she told him and asked him what he wanted to buy.
"It's too late for that,"
he screamed at her. Then, like a wild animal, he jumped over the counter and lunged at the girl. I couldn't see what happened next, because they both disappeared behind the counter. But I could hear their fight continue. It sounded like he was clawing at her while she tried to push him off. I had to act fast. I ran around the side of the counter, but when I reached them, the fight was already over. The girl slowly stood up while the man stayed motionless on the ground. He was dead. A vape pen was sticking out of the side of his neck. "You killed him," I said. The girl didn't respond. She must have been in shock. I pulled out my phone and called 911. Then I led the girl outside and we sat together on the sidewalk before the police arrived. When 2 cop cars finally drove in, the girl's shock must have dissipated. She told them everything that had happened. I vouched for everything she said, making sure that they knew it was all in self-defense. One of the policemen took the girl back to the station so she could give her full statement and probably get some medical attention. Another cop told me I was free to go, and then went inside the 7-Eleven to look over the crime scene. I started walking back home. I only lived 5 minutes away, and I never had any problems walking around at night. But I really wished that the police had offered to drop me off. I didn't want to be alone right now, especially after everything I'd just seen. I stayed on the main road. Just one car drove past. Otherwise, everything was motionless and silent. Right before I turned onto my street, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around but didn't see anyone. I started walking faster, and those footsteps sped up too. I started running down the street as fast as I could. When I reached the front door, I pulled out my keys. Before I could even open the door though, someone tapped me on the shoulder. I spun around and saw the man with the eye patch. His clothes were covered in blood, and the vape pen was still sticking out of his neck, but he was alive. He found me all the way back home. "You need medical help," I told him. "Let me call an ambulance." "You let me die," he whispered. "But you're not dead." "You let me die," he said again. His expression was twisted in rage. It seemed like he blamed me for what happened to him. I tried to reason with him, to tell him that if he let me go outside, I'd call an ambulance and get him help. But he wasn't listening. Instead, he kept repeating the same thing over and over. "You let me die." My house key was already in the door. Still facing him, I reached behind my back and tried to unlock the door without him seeing. I heard the familiar click noise, realizing that my door was unlocked. Then, as fast as I could, I twisted the knob, ran inside, and slammed the door behind me. It wouldn't close. The man's foot was in the way. He pushed his way in. Even though he was small and very wounded, he had enough strength to knock me to the ground. He crouched over me, one hand squeezing into my neck. Blood from his face was dripping on me. Some even got in my mouth. I tried to twist to the side, but he used his free hand to punch me in the stomach. I gasped for air. "Please," I struggled to say. "I just wanted cigarettes." He glared at me for a long moment. I thought he was getting ready to kill me, but then he let go of my throat and stood up. Slowly, I stood up too. We were face to face in the living room. I had no idea what he wanted me to do. Then he reached forward, waiting for me to give him something. It took me a while to figure out what he was doing. Then I pulled my new pack of cigarettes out of my pocket and handed it to him. He nodded in approval. Then, without saying a word, he walked away. I locked my door and called the police again. When they pulled into my street, they found the man lying dead on the ground. It took them 3 minutes to get there, but by the time they did, the man had smoked his last cigarette. The stub was still between his fingers. I guess having one last smoke was the only thing keeping him alive. Since then, I've given up smoking completely. Best decision of my life. I still get cravings sometimes, but whenever I do, I just think about the man with the eye patch.
The cabin looked inconspicuous and pretty enough on the outside. From the inside, it seemed a great place to be. An eco-brutalist haunt with plenty of wood and concrete. Tasteful as they came these days. Nature blending in with your living spaces. A perfect place to stay in the lush hills of Ubud, Bali. I still couldn't believe that we managed to book it on Airbnb one day before we were set to leave for Bali. And it's such a great price, too. Maybe they were the pregnancy hormones or my actual lack of time off, but I was excited as anyone could ever be for a trip. I mean, I never thought I would ever get to visit Bali in this lifetime, but there we were. My husband Dale and I lucked out and got free tickets from the raffle at our local supermarket, and boy, there we were. Though I have to say the cabin did have its quirks. The owner's choice of wall decor was something I couldn't wrap my head around. Everywhere I turned, there were these strange Balinese masks. They had protruding eyes, prominent mouth with sharp, large teeth. strange creatures that tread the line between real and not. And right by the entrance, there was a particularly large and strange one, stranger than the rest of the bunch. The mask was hung on a column that greeted us as soon as we walked through the front door. It had a strange necklace tied to its neck, long hair, and complete with threatening, bulging red eyes and sharp claws. Why did the owners want this to greet everyone who walked in here? Well, different people have different tastes, I thought. Also, it could just be a cultural thing. Perhaps the masks didn't mean anything ominous for the Balinese. You could never tell. But its eyes, its bulging red eyes, made me feel uneasy. As I helped Dale roll what was left of our luggage into the cabin, I could have sworn I felt its eyes move, following us across the property. Well, we're not going to let that ruin our vacation, though. That night, Dale was quickly in a good mood again, and somehow, with the help of some wine, he managed to coax me into one, too. We hadn't made love in what felt like ages, and with me being 3 months pregnant, obviously something like hadn't been a priority. That is, until we flew all the way across the world and landed in Bali. Even after 3 years of marriage, he still knew just how to get things going, knowing damn well that I loved it all and wanted more. But then, out of nowhere, I swear I saw the weird mask by the front door floating in my periphery vision. It was floating on its own, swiftly making its way across the kitchen by the living room.
Dale! Did you see that? The mask's alive.
Huh? What mask? Asked Dale.
The mask by the front door. I saw it floating around behind you.
Huh? Dale looked as confused as he could possibly be. Hang on. Let me go check it out. And just like that, he left me. I mean, I'm glad that he's going to check it out, but leaving me alone was also not the best of solutions. I sat there, taking in the cabin, tasteful gray walls and wooden floors. Well, they no longer seemed warm and inviting. That night, they seemed cold and distant, almost void of human... Ooh! Dale scared me out of nowhere. He was wearing the Balinese mask, and I screamed at his face, running away to the bedroom and locking the door. He knocked then. "Babe," he said softly. "I'm sorry, okay? It was a prank. Thought if the two of you got acquainted, then maybe you wouldn't be so afraid of him." Nah, Dale was right. It was just a stupid mask that was hanging on the wall. I got spooked. Pregnancy hormones. Well, that's exactly what happened. I took a deep breath and opened the door, looking at Dale tentatively as he held the mask up for me.
I guess it's kind of cute.
His eyes lit up. "Yeah? You think this guy's cute?" I nodded, trying my best to show him I wasn't scared. "Cuter than me?" he pestered.
Definitely.
When in doubt, lean into it, right? Oh, then maybe I'll wear it when we get it on. That got a big laugh out of me. It was funny. I began to actually enjoy how the mask's long hair felt against my skin. But then, suddenly, he stopped over my bulging belly and began to sniff it?
Dale, what are you doing?
My blood ran cold. The mask's eyes moved, too. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like the mask was wearing Dale. He was no longer in control. No. It was now looking at my belly with so much malice. I felt it with every inch of my body that I should run, and I did. I screamed and ran like hell out of that cabin. It chased me, at least until the cabin's fences. Floating, the mask carrying and using Dale's body like a puppet, hands outstretched to get me and my baby. I didn't stop running until I reached the nearest village and told the first person I saw everything. I didn't care if they thought I was crazy. My husband was just possessed by a weird mask thing, and For all I could tell, it tried to eat my baby. The villagers told me the mask was most likely possessed by a leek, a baby-eating deity that it portrayed and is known to inhabit its visual portrayals. They managed to catch Dale and perform some rituals that helped me get my husband back. Needless to say, the very next morning, we took the first flight back home.